And here we are. Hope everybody's liking that intro song. It's kind of the best I could come up with short notice. I don't really have the intro chops that I did before. I went through a bunch of different things, and that's the only one that kind of stood out for me. But that's kind of irrelevant because the show's not. This topic is not about theme songs, although maybe it will be in the future. Who knows? But keeping with kind of the theme of the show, where I just pick something randomly and just talk about it for no particular reason. This episode is about soup, because everybody loves soup. So let's talk about this, huh? Make sure I got my sound effect queued up. I didn't have my sound effect queued up there, so beside the times. So yes, I am actually going to talk about soup. I know you're probably tuning in and being like, soup? Why soup? Are you sure? Is it some kind of like, do the letters stand for something? I don't know. I don't think so. It's not like a government alphabet. It's real soup. I like soup. Soup is very versatile, which is probably why I like it. You can do anything with soup, just about. You can put anything in a soup. You can do all kinds of things. So yeah, soup. And I know there's people out there going, "Oh man, I can see where this show is going already. This is just going to be ridiculous." But no, seriously, think about it. When you think about soup, you have things in your mind. You have like preconceptions. You identify things with soup. Usually, you identify it with cold weather, right? People have soup in cold weather to warm you up. But there are cold soups. There's like gazpacho and that kind of stuff. I said that really badly, but gazpacho. I don't know. I don't have an accent, so I can't do it. But yeah, you can. It fills you up. It warms you up, and you can do so many different things with soup. And there's so many different kinds of soup. You got just basically soup. You've got stew. You've got chowder. You've got all kinds of things. Like you can make so many things with it, depending on what you put in it and how thick it is. You know. And I'm a big fan. I like soup. I don't know a single person in my life that doesn't like soup, at least on some level. Like you pair it with things. There's iconic pairings. You've got grilled cheese sandwiches. Got to have tomato soup, right? Don't you? I mean, what would you have with grilled cheese sandwich if you didn't have tomato soup? I don't know. There's chicken noodle soup for when you're not feeling well, when you're feeling under the weather, when you're sick. You've got you go to upscale restaurants. You've got French onion soup, which is a personal favorite of mine. I really like the French onion soup. You've got something my dad used to make that I used to hate as a kid. I hated it. I absolutely loathed it, and that's not a knock against him as like a maker of food, but he used to make this corn chowder. Okay. And a chowder is basically just it's a soup that's a little thicker than the average soup, and sometimes chowders have like clam chowders are more of a creamy soup. They're cream based, but his wasn't. His was broth based, and it had potatoes and bits of bacon in there. And you're thinking, yeah, potatoes and bacon sounds pretty good, right? And then it had a ton of yellow corn in it, and if you like yellow corn, which I do now. I do like corn. I didn't as a kid, which is mostly the problem. If you like that, it's really, really good. But at the time, man, I hated it. And he knew I hated it. And he would make it in large quantities and give me a huge bowl of it. Because it was good for me. I mean, it's potatoes and meat and broth and the corn. I mean, it's good for you. Man, I hated it. And then after a while, after I moved out and I'd been growing for a while, I actually started making it myself. And I got a taste for it. It's not bad. It's good. I didn't appreciate it at the time, clearly, but I like me some corn chowder. Take a little drink here. But I like all kinds of soups. I like beef stews, the real thick beef stews with the potatoes and carrots, all that good stuff, the celery. And you go to one of my favorite restaurants here where I live. There's a buffet. And they have soup. They have Asian soups. I don't get them very often, but sometimes I do. They have the hot sour soup. And I'm not sure what makes it hot and sour, because I don't get like a sour from it. But I think that's an expression. I think that's just partly what they put in it. And they have the egg drop soup, and that's good stuff. And I like that. I think soup is, you can do a lot of things with soup. You can, like, if you have a fridge full of just random stuff, you haven't gone to the grocery store in a while, and you're just like, man, I got to eat something, and I need a big amount of it, but all I've got is like a little bit of this, I got a little bit of that, I got a little bit of this. Throw it in a pot, give it some broth, make some soup out of it, right? Once again, we have Orchestral Mechanist in the chat room, and he says chili is my favorite. And chili is a good choice as well. Chili is, I consider it a soup. I don't know if it's technically, in the kitchen parlance, a soup per se, but I consider it a soup. I'd call it a soup. And you can do a lot with that, too. You can make vegetarian chili. You can make white chicken chili. You can make regular chili. You can make 12-bean chili. You can make chili without any beans. You can make all kinds of chili. Like, you can make spicy, not spicy. You can do so much with it. It's like it's a catch-all food soup. You know, you can do so much with it. You can pair it with things. You can make it the centerpiece of a meal. You can make it an appetizer. You can make it like an afterthought. Like if people want to sip on a light broth after their meal or something to help fill in any gaps or something like that. You know, you can do so much with it. So I'm an appreciator. I am an appreciator of soup. And I'll tell you, there's probably no other podcast on the face of this earth that just has an episode like this that's just soup, where it's not specifically a cooking show. I'll tell you that. But yeah, that's me. Soup, stews, chowders. I like them. I like all of them. And there's all kinds of weird things you can do with soup. Like I said, you can just take anything and put it in there. Oh, pardon me. And you've got a soup. You've got all kinds of bases that you can start with. You can start with vegetable broth. You can start with chicken broth. You can start with bone broth. All kinds of things. And you can just do all this stuff to start with. You can have it real thin with just a little bit of stuff in it, some vegetables. Or you can have noodles in your soup. And then you start getting into the soup accessories. Okay, and this is a big area, the soup accessories. This is where you add maybe some crackers to your soup. You got oyster crackers, or you got like saltines, or you add some croutons to your soup. I don't know anybody else who does that, but I like that. Just sprinkle some croutons on top, get a little bit of crunch. Huh? You can add cheese on top. You can add a little dollop of sour cream if you're going for like a taco kind of soup, you know, Southwest soup. See, you can do even more with it than what's in the bowl. And that's why, again, it's so versatile. It can do everything. Soup is like the miracle food. And a lot of times it's a lot more nourishing than what it would be if the ingredients were on their own, because it spreads everything out. It helps the nutrients kind of spread around. Although I have heard people say if you boil things for too long, it boils out the nutrients and things like that. And I don't know. I feel like those nutrients have to go somewhere still. And you have it, if you still have it contained in a broth, it's going to end up in the broth. You know, like if you take a bunch of broccoli, you cook it on the stove, and you cook it until it's absolutely wilted and just soft and just bleh, and then you just spoon it out and put it on a plate, you're leaving a bunch of stuff in the pan, sure. But if you put that in some soup, that's different. It's in the broth now. You drink the broth, you're good. That's what I think, anyway. People in the audience are like, wow, he's really getting into this soup thing. I told you I was gonna soup, right? And at my house, we do have a lot of different soups. We have canned soup, but we make a lot of homemade soup. We make a lot of soup with broths and things like that. Everyone else in my household but me is vegetarian. So we make most of our stuff with vegetable broths, or broths that are flavored to be like the other broths, like the chicken broth and the beef broth, but they're not. They're free of that kind of stuff. But we make a lot of noodle soups. Today there was some rice soup, some soup with rice. That was actually leftovers. It was leftovers from last night. We'd had stir fry last night, and so we had rice and vegetables, and there was a little bit left in the fridge. Dump that in some broth, make a soup out of it. You got vegetable and rice soup. Orchestral Mechanist in the chat room once again. He says soup can also be really cheap to make, and that is true because you can put almost anything in it. You go to the store, or even if you start from scratch, you can even make broth from scratch. That's really not that bad. You just take some water and take some seasonings and things. I mean, seasonings can be expensive. Like garlic's like ridiculously expensive these days. Pepper's expensive, but a little bit goes a long way. You get some of that, you make up your own broth, or you go and get those cubes, the compressed cubes full of the seasonings and the flavor and stuff. And then you can just put anything in it. You can get super cheap. You can get ramen noodles. Put those in your soup. I'm not myself a big fan, but you can. You can do that. You get that. You can get, like, I get these cans of potatoes. These canned potatoes, they're like 89 cents a can. All right, for a little regular-sized can of potatoes. And I could put those in the soup. So I've got that, I've got broth, I've got a meal for probably less than $5. Honestly, if I worked it all out. Probably less than $2 if I really got like down to it and checked that. If it was just the potatoes and the broth. And that's still something that's filling, it's something that's nourishing, you know? It's good stuff. And you can get really elaborate with it, too. Like, some chilies are ridiculous. You got all kinds of things in some chilies. You got, like I said, 12-bean chili with peppers and onions and the beef. Or if you're vegetarian, you got the substitute. Or any of that kind of stuff. And you got so many things with it. And you can usually eat it for days, too. Like, you make soup on Sunday. And if you put the right stuff in it, you can eat it as leftovers for the next 3 or 4 days, and it'll still be good. Just put it in the fridge, reheat it, you know, maybe add a dash of this or a dash of that as you go on to make it interesting, and it lasts. You can freeze it. You can freeze soups. A lot of people freeze soups. A lot of people make up huge gallons and gallons and gallons of soup, and then they freeze it, and you can eat it months later. You know, again, versatile. The kind of stuff that you get in like military and survival stuff, they have freeze-dried soup, which will last almost forever in this packet with no air in it. All you need is like water and a heat source and something like that, and it activates the soup. And that reminds me of some funny stuff, because not everybody knows how to do that kind of thing, and the instructions aren't always very clear. Like, there's an automotive show that I've seen on Amazon that's a successor to an automotive show from BBC. Not to name drop anybody or anything, because I don't want to get sued. But in one of their things, they do these survival challenges where they're out and they got to drive cars across a big country. And there was one where they had to build a car and drive across Mongolia, right? And they had the supply of survival rations. And they had soup in these packages, basically. And like stroganoff and stuff like that. But he didn't know how to make it. He didn't know what he was doing. The guy who was in charge of it didn't know what he was doing. So it ended up like this tasteless paste-like stuff in a pan. It was pretty gross looking. But if you know what you're doing with that, there you go. You can freeze dry your soup. You can, you know, it's a survival food. It's some good stuff. And like I said, you can have them for anything. You can have them for an appetizer. You can have them for a main meal. There's so much stuff you can do with it. And that's kind of why I like it. Like, I don't eat as much soup as I used to. I used to just have tons of soup. Soup all the time. One of the things that I did when I moved out, when I first lived on my own, and I had to buy all my own groceries and stuff, I had a lot of, like, hamburger helper style things and like those all included meals where you just add an ingredient and then, you know, you use the packets of stuff. But then I would make stuff homemade, and usually I would make some kind of soup. I'd get either a broth or I'd just stir with a water base and just go for there and just have a lot of soup. And I think I kind of burned out a little bit on soup, which is probably why I don't eat it personally as much as I used to. But I still like it. And I always think once in a while, maybe I should sit down and I want to make like a big stew one of these days. And I've been thinking about this actually for weeks. For weeks I've been thinking about making this big slow-cooked stew. And we have like a slow cooker, and I may commandeer it because I don't think I've ever used the slow cooker on my own. I think we've made stuff here. We've made like family meals and stuff with it, but I don't think I've ever done and sat down and just threw stuff in for me and just been like, I can make myself this hearty stew. And one of these days I want to. I got to get the right kind of stuff for it though. I want to get like the big thick potatoes and carrots and things like that. And so one of these days. But soup is like a cultural thing too. Like in Japan, of course, they have ramen. Ramen is a huge thing, and ramen is basically like a soup. It's a noodle dish. It's in a broth. It's not often that they have it without a broth of some kind. I mean, they have all kinds of like noodle dishes and things that aren't that, but if you're talking about specifically like ramen and things like that, it's almost always broth based. It's like the cup of noodle kind of stuff, all that kind of thing. And it can be event based too. Like you got wedding soup, which most people it's not a thing that people do anymore, but it used to be. That's where it got its name. It was a thing where you would serve the soup at weddings, that the little tiny meatballs and the little barley and stuff like that. It's an Italian soup. I didn't realize it was an Italian soup, but it has like Parmesan. It's supposed to have that kind of stuff in it, like light amounts. But I don't know. Orchestra Mechanist in the chat room once again. He says I should make Irish stew. And that's right. That's pretty close to the idea of what I've got for the stew that I want. A nice, thick, kind of gloopy, and that sounds kind of like, ooh, gloopy soup. But yeah, that's what I want. I want this thick soup that's almost like a sauce, like a light gravy with a bunch of stuff in it. That's what I want. A light gravy with a whole bunch of stuff in it, and that's my soup. That's my stew. And an Irish stew, you can use like a pint of Guinness when you make it. Brew that in the Guinness, get the dark beer, the stout in there, and everything like that. And so that's kind of like, I don't know if I'll make it that way, but that's the direction my brain has been thinking as far as soup goes. So soup. Guys, soup for real. Like, what are some of your favorite soups? I know in the chat room we've had chili mentioned as a favorite soup. I know some people in my household like broccoli cheddar soup with potatoes and things like that. That's a good soup. Like I mentioned before, we have a lot of noodle soups in my house. My daughter she calls it noodles and broth, and she has noodles and tofu in broth, and it's basically a soup. It's basically soup, but because she doesn't like soup, we don't call it soup. You know, it's the same thing, but just don't tell your child it's soup. Call it something different. It's a smorgasbord extravaganza made of noodles. The broth is extra. Oh, great. The canned soups we have tomato soup, you know, because if you ever want a cheese sandwich, if you ever want a grilled cheese sandwich, you got to have that tomato soup. And then we have lentil soup. Lentils is another good one, too. Lentils, a good set of lentils, pardon me there, a good set of lentils can be just as hearty and filling as a very meaty stew. They're very, very, very filling, and they have that savory kind of taste. If you're going to do lentils yourself at home and you buy the lentils separate, you got to prepare them first, though. Lentils are like beans. Like, if you don't get the canned beans that are already there for you, that are already soft and whatnot, if you get, like, a bag of beans, you got to soak them. Like, at least 24 hours overnight, that kind of thing, in water. And sometimes you have to change the water and do it, like, a couple of times for them to get, like, real good and soft. Lentils are kind of the same way. We haven't had the best success trying to do that with our lentils. We've managed it once or twice. But it's difficult. You always get that stray lentil in there that's hard as a rock. And you're just sitting there enjoying your soup, and then, oh man, that's the lentil didn't get, bust a tooth on it. But canned lentil soup, if you're going to get canned lentil soup, that's all done. And like I said, it's very savory, it's very, very meaty soup for not having any meats in it. So if you're a vegetarian or something like that, it's a good alternative, very good alternative. And don't get me started on the cheese soups, because I can't eat as much regular cheese anymore. So if I make a cheese soup, I have to get large quantities of far more expensive uh, vegetarian alternatives. And but you can make nacho cheese soup. You can make like broccoli cheese soup. You can make cheesy potato soup. You can make all kinds of soup out of cheese, where basically the cheese is the broth. It's just a cheesy milk broth. And man, it sounds gross, but man, it's making me feel like I'm hungry. Just give me a big old bowl of melted cheese. That's my soup right there. Melty cheese. Yeah, lots of things you can do with soup. I like soup. I really like soup. I know I've said that like 12 times this episode, and everybody's like, what an episode. Soup. You're missing out, though. I mean, if you weren't in the chat room, like, telling me what your favorite soup, we could have had a huge conversation about how your favorite soup was, I don't know. I'm drawing a blank on some really crazy soup that you could have picked. But, I mean, you can do, even if you're into seafood, you can do soups. You can do the clam chowder. That's a big one. People like clam chowder. They have... This is something I didn't like as a kid. I thought it was gross. There was... Campbell's had cans of what it called oyster stew. And it had, like, it didn't have the oysters taken out of the shells or anything. It was actual, like, full oysters you gotta crack open in a broth, and it was gross. It looked gross. It smelled gross. I don't know why we even had it. We had it in my family, with my family one time. Well, they didn't make it. Like, nobody in my household actually made it. I was curious about it, and I thought, oh, it's probably like clam chowder, because that day maybe I was thinking, oh, I want some clam chowder. So I opened the can up and poured it in the bowl, and I was like, this is not what I was after. And it did not get eaten. I'm not an oyster fan. I don't like oysters. I don't do that. I don't. I'm not going to just... No. Just thinking about it in the shell and everything. No. No, thank you. But I was also just reminded about cheeseburger soup. Cheeseburger soup has... you can do it vegetarian with, like, the alternative, with the different alternatives there. Like the Impossible meat, which is not meat, of course. Or the various other brands are out there. Put some ketchup and mustard in there with the cheese and everything, and it sounds like you're just throwing a bunch of stuff in there and hoping it comes out, but trust me, it's good stuff. It's good stuff. I like it with a little bit of onion. Other people in my household do not, can't eat the onion, but still, you do what you can do with it. You can do barbecue soup, which is not like barbecue sauce just in a bowl, because that's kind of much. That's a bit much. But you can make a soup that's got like barbecued stuff in it, like barbecue chicken, or again with the alternatives and whatnot, and put in peppers and things like that, and make it like a, get pieces of cornbread and dip it in there. See? Gotta have me some cornbread. I like cornbread and chili. If I'm gonna have chili, I like having cornbread. There's two kinds of cornbread, though. You got the cornbread that's solid, that's like crumbly, that's dry, which is why you want the soup, because it's made to be dry. So you dip it in the soup, or dip it in the chili, And then there's spoon bread, which is cornbread, that seems like it should have gone in the oven for another few hours, but it's not. It's good. It's delicious. I can't describe it to you. Look it up. Use your Google machine and look it up, or whatever you have. If you have one of those fruit-based operating systems, you can look at that too. But, yeah, cornbread. Accessories. See, accessories. You gotta accessorize your soups. We have oyster crackers here, but my daughter never wants to put them in her noodle soup. Ever. She just wants to eat them separate. I'm like, it tastes great in the soup. You just put a couple on top. No, I don't want to do that. Oh, fine. Whatever. Bacon. Sprinkle some bacon on top. You can even get those Bacos, which are actually made out of soy, believe it or not. The Bacos brand ones are actually made out of, like, compressed soy or something like that, and they're not even bacon. That's why they have a separate kind that's, like, real bacon, and they look like real kind of crumbly bacon, but they're different. If you're going for the actual Bacos here in the United States, ain't got no bacon in them. Not a shred of bacon, but they are delicious. That's you take that bottle and just tip back and just eat them straight out of the bottle. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Delicious. Now you're hearing about the kind of stuff I did as a kid. That and the Easy Cheese and those like squeeze bottles where you just like push the tip down and it squeezes it out like frosting on a cake. Just there you go. That's my childhood. That's my childhood. Easy Cheese and Bacos. I'd go to salad bars. Because that was used to be a thing. You never find salad bars anywhere. Even before the virus came through a few years ago, and people got upset about buffets in general. But before that, like nobody did salad bars anymore. They started going away. And you used to be able to go up and go, like, you got the lettuce and you got all the different stuff. And some places had like 3 different kinds of lettuce. You just go and you pick what you want, and then you'd get the dressing, and then you got the toppings. The toppings is what you really wanted. As a kid, if your parents took you to a restaurant with a salad bar and it was included in your meal, you were expected to get some green stuff, right? So you had to get the lettuce. But you got this little layer of lettuce on your plate for the bottom, respectable. And then you piled on the cheese and the dressing and the Bacos and the croutons. And if they had ham, you pile that on, and the chicken and stuff for Caesar salads and whatnot. And you just pile it on, so you got like 3 inches of not salad sitting on top of your lettuce. That was a salad for me as a kid. That's what we would do. But I'm going back to soup. You can do the same thing with soup, but the bottom part is still really good. I like lettuce now. I didn't as a kid. I mean, when you're a kid, you don't like any of that kind of stuff. So now I have more salad in my salad than otherwise. But with soup, you got to have the soup. You can't just like put a dribble of broth at the bottom and then pile on a bunch of stuff on top. You got to have the soup too, because that's how it goes. A Mechanist says crackers in soup is overrated. Well, that's fine, sir, but don't you tell me the croutons are overrated in the soup, because you have not lived, sir. You have not lived without a crouton in your soup. Croutons are fantastic in soup. Absolutely fantastic. As long as you get them when they're still crunchy. You can't let them sit in the soup too long and get all soggy and weird. The bottom part can get a little soft, but you have to have the crunch on the top. You can't just mix them in. Okay, you gotta eat them while they're crunchy. Right? Them's fighting words, sir. He says croutons are even worse. Croutons are not. Croutons are delicious. This show just turned controversial. Now it's a croutons episode. Never mind. I'm not gonna make a whole episode about croutons. But still, like I said, you can, and everybody has different thoughts on what belongs in their soup and what doesn't. And that's what's great about it. You can do so much with it. You can put anything in it. You can put any vegetables. You can put any meats. You can put any alternatives in there. You can put cheese. You can put everything. It's not a dessert, though. It's not a dessert. You can have like sweet soups, but there's not often that you have dessert soups. You know, it's not really as much of a thing. I mean, you could, but for me, if I had a whole bowl of something sweet like that, it's like having a whole bowl of like super sweet cereal. And you can get some like that. Like in other cultures, they've got some. I haven't looked it up enough, so I'm not going to talk too much about it because it's not a thing you see in the United States here. You don't see dessert soups here, but I'm sure you probably do see them in other countries because they do things differently than we do. We have our own kind of culinary oddities. Like we've got American cheese. I was just talking about that yesterday. How American cheese isn't really cheese. It's like barely aged at all. It's like barely cheese, and that's what makes it American cheese. It's like it's not sharp at all. It's not aged. It's like, oh, yesterday it was still milk and today it's cheese. you know? So, that's the difference there. We do things different here in the United States. We don't, we have some compromises and other things we don't compromise at all. So, culinary cultural differences. But there you have it. That's soup. I've hit about the half-hour mark, and most of these episodes are only going to be about half hour, 45 minutes. They're short topics. They're short, little, easy, digestible topics like a nice bowl of soup with a bunch of croutons. Thank you very much, sir or madam, or in between, or off to the side, or however you want to identify. No exclusions here, of course. Everybody likes soup. Soup is not gender-related, okay? I don't know why anybody would think that anyway. I know some people say, you can't have chili because it's a manly food. Okay. I don't know who would say that, but that seems kind of dumb. So, soup is for everybody. Everybody can have soup. Soup for everybody. That's my presidential platform. Soup for everyone. Everyone has some soup. Got a free bowl of soup. Just one. Just one. I'm not made out of money. Not going to print out more money for your soup. So that's it. Hope you guys had fun. I may have a guest next week. I was possibly going to have a guest this week, but some things came up. So I think that got moved to next week, and we're going to talk about some things next week. As per usual, if you would like to be a guest, and if you want to talk about something on the show, by all means. My policy with guests is the guest is usually somebody who knows more about the subject they're talking about than I do, which is a good humbling experience, I think. I pick somebody who knows something more about something than I do, because frequently I know a lot of stuff, and I always kind of am proud of the fact that I know a lot of stuff. But there are a lot of things that I don't know, and I think this is a good opportunity for me to show that I do not know absolutely everything. And there's people in the audience going, he admitted finally. Yeah, well, I know more than you do. Anyway. So if you have something that you want to talk about, come on the show. You've heard how it is. This is the third episode. This is how I do it. It's just me talking about something for a half hour, and this would be you and me just discussing something for about a half hour to 45 minutes or longer. I mean, if we really got into a deep discussion about something, I could go on for a full hour or more. Who knows? No exact time limit, but there you have it. So that's it. That's episode 3 of Let's Talk About This, the new popular podcast that talks about whatever you want, whenever you want, and some things that you never expected, I guess. So, that's it. That's all I got. I will catch you guys next week, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Spreaker and on YouTube shortly thereafter. Also on demand on iTunes, Spotify, Deezer, Apple, Amazon, all these different places that you find good podcast entertainment. And also me, whether it's good podcast entertainment or not. So, that's it. For real. I'm leaving. Eat more soup.